everyone, and welcome to this evening's lecture by Dr. Brian Lacey, who is going to speak to us about St. Columba, founder of Durrow, and what do we really know about him. We're absolutely delighted to have Dr. Lacey speak to us on today, the 9th of June, which is Patron Day for Durrow and the feast day of St. Colmcille. And I know Helen Bracken, our chair, will have a few words about this after the lecture. Dr. Brian Lacey is an historian and archaeologist specialising mainly in the early medieval period in counties Donegal and Derry. His interdisciplinary PhD in 1999 dealt with the heritage of St. Columcille. He lectured at Magee College, Derry between 1974 and 1986, and later set up Derry's Heritage and Museum Service, having directed a series of salvage excavations at Troubles bomb sites in the city. He led the pioneering archaeological survey of County Donegal between 1980 and 1983. And between 1998 and 2012, he headed the Discovery Programme, an institute based in Dublin for advanced research in Irish archaeology. He is the author of many research papers and about 15 books, including St. Columba, His Life and Legacy, Manus O'Donnell, The Life of Columcille, and Medieval and Monastic Derry, 6th century to 1600. A recent edited book dealt with what happened in Derry during the Easter Rising of 1916. And his most recent book, which has literally just been published, is called Adamnan, Aunan, Unan, The Life and Afterlife of a Donegal Saint. And we'll have details of how you can purchase that book at the end of the lecture. So I will now hand over to Brian, who is going to give us the lecture. If you're ready there, Brian.
I hope so. You're seeing all my pictures anyway.
Yes, we can see them, yeah.
I have to compliment you on the pronunciation of Aunan, with all its H's in the middle. First of all, just thank you very much, Lisa, for the technical assistance, and thank you very much to the members of the Society for inviting me to speak. It is a kind of an important day. It's the 9th of June. It's the feast of St. Columba, actually commemorating the day he died. And of course, there's several names for Columcille or Columba. Columba is just really the Latin form of his name. Columcille is what he's known as in Irish, but almost certainly Columcille as were post dates. It's a post-mortem name given to him as part of the growth of his cult as a saint. Now, he in some ways, he is a favorite, or maybe even the favorite of the Irish saints. I'm told, but I've never checked, that if you go to the folklore collection in UC, the National Folklore Collection, the biggest entry in the catalogue is for Columcille because he's such a popular saint. Now, the dates of the saint are, we have two sets of dates there on your screen. One is, if you like, what we've had, the traditional dates that people have been used to for a long time. But in the last few years, Dr. Dan McCarthy from Trinity College has done really intense and marvellous work on the Irish annals, and he has somewhat revised the dates. And he would now think that Columcille was born in the year 520, went to Scotland in 562, then went on to found the monastery in Iona in 563, and probably died in the year 593. And his birthday, and of course this is up by tradition, there were no such things as birth certificates in the 6th century. So, but he was born, the tradition is that he was born on the 7th of December, and he died on this day, the 9th of June. And like all Irish saints, his death day then becomes his festival. And as a result of those dates, that means that this year, beginning last December 7th and continuing on to next December 7th, that it's the anniversary of his 1500th anniversary of his birth. Now, one of the things that Columcille is possibly not as well known for, but very importantly for us, when he went to Iona, one of the first things that happened when they went there is they began to note historic events. And this was the beginnings of Irish history, the first records that we have from Irish and Scottish history, as it happens. And these were just notes, similar to kind of newspaper headlines, such and such a battle happened, such and such a king died, or whatever it was. And gradually these built up, and they became what we now call the Iona Chronicle. And between the years about 560, 740, that's all we have for in terms of historical contemporary evidence. Now, this is a hugely important change in Irish culture from the prehistoric, when we have no contemporary documentation, to the historic, when we have. And from that Iona Chronicle, the Iona Chronicle was, a copy of it was brought to Ireland about 740, and probably to Armagh, and from then on, it develops across the whole of Ireland, and we get later on all these annalistic compilations that people are familiar with. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Brian. Yeah.
You see my screen?
We can see your screen.
Oh, there we are. Sorry, something blipped on my screen for a moment.
Okay.
Anyway.
And actually, sorry, Brian, just before you start off with there again, you might start your video again. Sorry, that got knocked off. So if you just go down to the left-hand corner of your screen and click start video.
Gosh, sorry. The left-hand corner.
Left-hand corner. Put your cursor.
Oh, start video.
Yeah, just because we've lost your. There you go. There,
are we fine. Okay now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can carry on there. That's great. Thank you.
So I was saying that the later Irish annals, which we're all familiar with, Annals of Ulster, Annals of Tirganach, Annals of Formas, etc., were all originate. The earliest records for them come from the Iona Chronicle. So in that sense, Columba and the Columbian monastery, at any rate, is, if you like, the inventor of Irish history, contemporary Irish history. But he's also, of course, a figure of folklore and legend and so on. And I just put this little poem up, which is kind of sums of 300 churches he founded. 100 were close by the sea, and Column, as well as the churches, 300 good books wrote he. I'm having trouble with my slides again, whatever. Okay. Now, as I'm sure you all know, we now have one patron saint, St. Patrick, but in ancient times there were 3 patron saints: Patrick, Brigid, and Columba. And that's just an interesting image of them, which I'll come back to later on. It's a mosaic of the 3 saints in the central lobby of the Palace of Westminster in London. Now, just to say something about my own kind of credentials, this is actually the 50th year that I've been celebrating or commemorating or studying Colmcille. I started in UCD in 1971. My first tutor there was a woman, some of you might know her, Maureen Wall from Donegal. And Maureen was determined that whatever history we learned at UCD, we were definitely going to learn the history of Colmcille. And then after I graduated, I got a job at McGee College in Derry. And from there, I came into County Donegal to do an archaeological survey. I went back to Derry then, working for the City Council in their Heritage Service. And then I did a PhD on Colmcille. And then I worked in Dublin for the Discovery Programme Research Institution. And I now live in a place called Dunluhy, which is literally at the foot of Errigal and is only about 10 miles from Garton, the birthplace of the saint. And I just flashed through some of those books that I've written down the years. And I have to put the ad in. This is my latest book, which is literally published last Friday, and deals to some extent with County Offaly, because places like Birr and Duro figure in that book, in Adamnon's life as well as in Columba's. Now, just going back to Columba himself, this in the middle of the 19th century, Bishop William Reeves, who was very distinguished Church of Ireland bishop, and he did he produced the major edition of its time of the Vita Columbae by Adamnon. But as part of that, he did the survey of Ireland and Britain, and he came up with about 56 sites in Scotland in some way or other dedicated or connected with the story of Colmcille, and about 37 in Ireland. And then in addition to that, there are probably others. He didn't count every holy well, for instance, things like that. But in addition to those places in Scotland and in Ireland, well, we know that there are several places in the north of England. Particularly, I want to emphasize Lindisfarne Island off the north coast of England, a bit north of Newcastle upon Tyne, and then Durham Cathedral, the great cathedral at Durham, which in a sense is inherited the heritage of Lindisfarne. And Durham was a great centre for the cult of St. Columba, preserved a number of manuscripts and relics and so on, indeed some very important ones, as we see later on. Now, Colmcille's main foundation was, of course, the island of Iona, the monastery, which is there on the map just above the arrow, Columcille, because it's given in its Gaelic form there. And for those of you who don't know, Iona is a small island of a slightly larger island, Mull, which is itself off the coast of Scotland. And in terms of islands, I mentioned Lindisfarne, and Lindisfarne became a very important monastery in the north of England, and had all sorts of daughter houses and so on. And it was founded by St. Aidan. This is St. Aidan here, from Iona, who's invited and then goes and founds. So Iona is a hugely important institution, if you like, on the west side and the Atlantic side, but Lindisfarne is its equivalent on the east side of England. Now, if you go to Iona today, there is not an awful lot to be seen of the ancient monastery. I'll show you some more in a minute, but one of the few things there are from the ancient monastery are the great crosses. And this is the nearest one to the camera is this St. Martin's cross. In fact, it's a replica because the cross itself is broken, but is in the museum. But behind it is St. Martin's cross, which is the real cross. And the reason why there's not much to see now in Iona when you go there is because about 1200, a huge new Benedictine abbey, enormous abbey, was, as it were, built on top of the ancient monastery. So consequently, the ancient monastery is not really easily available. But there are this 12th century church just beside the abbey. And then this is a map of archaeological excavations on Iona. There in the center is the Iona Abbey, the main building on there. And then you can see elements of the ditch and so on, and various other features. I won't go into the detail of these, but just to say recently, excuse me, at the beginning of this year, a new publication has appeared detailing the evidence from some of these excavations, and it confirms that the ditch that surrounded the monastery does date from the time of Columba. So that's a very interesting development archaeologically. Now, Colmcille has Colmcille, as we say, we have his various names: Columban Latin, Colmcille in Irish, sometimes split into two words, Callum often in England, column, and there's a spelling mistake there. That should be Moyle column, which of course means bald, like myself, bald as it were in honor, or tonsured in honor of Colmcille, Gilla column, and so on. There are lots more of these, and of course they form not only personal names but also surnames. And Colmcille is, widely known as a patron of all sorts of things. Here in Donegal, football teams and all sorts of things are named after him. But this is a school in the Inishowen Peninsula. But here, for instance, is a church, St. Columba's, in Manhattan, in New York, on West 25th Street. And maybe slightly more interestingly, here is a youth group, a youth club in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And it's a Presbyterian youth group. Dar es Salaam, by the way, is not possibly 90% Muslim city, but here we have a St. Columba's Presbyterian youth group just beside St. Columba's Church, and I've actually visited that myself. Now, how do we know anything about this man who lived in the 7th century? Well, we're very lucky that 3 medieval lives survive from describing his life, or at least purporting to. And there was an older one. This is a page of Adamnon's down here, Vita Columbae, written about 700, and the manuscript survives in a library now in Switzerland. And it's a fascinating story how it got to Switzerland, got to there, but I have to leave that for another day. But if you can see the small writing here is a quotation from an even earlier life written by a man, his name is there, Comenius, or Comena in Irish, sorry, I keep on doing that. And he's known as Comenius Albus, the white Comenius. And somebody forgot to put in the white, and they had to add it in like a kid in school, add it in on the top. So that we know that was an earlier book, Liber de Virtutibus Sancti Columbae, by this man Comenius. And then that's quoted, and it's actually an important quote, historically important quote, and it's quoted by Adamnan in the Vita Columbae, written about 700. And I thought you should really see, this is the entry in the manuscript in Adamnan's in the manuscript in Switzerland, and it is the foundation of Durrow. So that's there's the name Darva, and afterwards it says quod scotice dicitur Darva, which is called in Irish Darva or Durrow. Now that was written about 700. The next one we have is the Bahaman Gaeilge, Middle Irish, which is actually a sermon for the 9th of June, for today. This would have been read in Derry. The manuscript or the text is from Derry. It was composed sometime between about 1150 and 1182, and probably before 1169. And it was a sermon for preaching on the 9th of June, today, on the feast day of the saint. And then a few hundred years later, in the 16th century, the man who was going to become Lord of Tirchonel, Manus O'Donnell, he compiled and composed a huge work, which is the Baha Colmcille. It runs to about 120,000 words. It's an enormous work by any standards. And that manuscript is now in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and he finished it in the year 1532. And I suspect he started it maybe around the 1520s, if you like, as a kind of a millennial memorial to the birth of Columba, which would have taken place around that time. Now, on the front page of the kind of frontispiece of the manuscript, there's this portrait of supposed to be of St. Columcille, but it's utterly anachronistic. Columcille is dressed there as a 16th century monk, abbot, rather than a 6th century monk. And we think, in fact, that the face of of Columcille there is possibly the face of Manus O'Donnell himself, that he put himself into the picture, as it were. Now, Columcille's family, there's a huge amount of propaganda and sort of distortion about his family. And, you know, there are stories that he could have become King of Ireland and things like that. Well, they are, to say the least, a little bit fictional. But his family were extremely important, certainly in Donegal, and at a great. And this is a hill called Crochan Hill in County Donegal, East County Donegal. There is the River Finn, which divides Donegal on that side from Tyrone on this side, and the border runs between them. And it's an extremely important geographical place. The area there are lots and lots of mythological stories about it, place names suggestive, and an awful lot of archaeology, a huge amount of archaeology connected with this. So this is, in a sense, the equivalent for Donegal as the Hill of Tara is for the rest of the country, to some extent. And it was almost certainly on this hill, or in the vicinity of it, that Columcille's family, the Kenneal Connell, or Gunnell, Kenneal Gunnell, who give their names to Tirchonel, of course, and the name of Donegal, that this was their headquarters, this was their royal domain, if you like. And his mother before I leave that, sorry, I should say that his father, Fidelbert, and we'll see that in a moment, almost certainly came from this area. Now, there are lots of different stories about where his mother comes from. Ethna is supposed to be, or said to be, the name of his mother. But of course, Ethna was a very widely honored territorial goddess in ancient Ireland. So it's very hard, and lots of both gods. I'm here in Dunlucha in Donegal, named after the god Lu, or Lu Lavada, and his mother was Ethna as well. And very often the stories about Colmcille and Lu get mixed up. So it's very hard to know if that actually was his mother's name. But insofar as we have a name, that's her name. And there are various stories about her, that she comes from Wexford, she comes from Manna, she comes from Leinster, so on and so forth. But in fact, this text here, the Corpus of Genealogy of the Saints, says she comes from the Corporica of Fanad. And Fanad is, I'll show you that in a moment. But the little village of Kilmacrennan here in Donegal was formerly known as Dura Ethna, and by tradition, this was her place. This was where Ethna comes from. And this is a map. Now, his father came from these people, the Kenil Gunnel, and in fact, where that bend in the river is where that hill is that I showed you a moment ago. So this is where his father came from. And up here is the Corporica. And to me, at any rate, the story tradition that makes most sense is that this is where his mother comes from. And Garton, where he's born, is just around there. And this is Garton. Garton is a word which almost certainly means more or less the same thing as the English word garden. Because if you go there now, the whole area is surrounded by mountains and bog and really rough, unfriendly territory. And then in the middle of all of this, like a jewel, is a little area of greenery, a garden with 3 lakes. And this whole area, everything you see there in front of you is in that picture, is filled with stories and monuments all about the early life of St. Columcille. And as with everything in Ireland, there has to be a split. And there are actually 2 birthplaces, but this one, a place called Lachnacooey, which I don't have a slide of, but that has a sort of a separate history. And the more reliable tradition is that this is his birthplace, a place called Churchtown or Ballinchampel. And Manus O'Donnell, who wrote the great Life that we were talking about a while ago, almost certainly built this church in the early 16th century on that site. And the area is filled with all sorts of things, like this island in the lake is known as Columcille's playground. This was his playground where he played. And because Columcille was a holy person and indeed a saint, there was a flagstone out on that island called Leachna Ganamiach, the stone of chastity. And anyone else who went out to play out there would lose their fertility. And this was, of course, just a way of, if you like, preserving the sanctity of the site. And not far away from where there's these little marks on a rock, just a piece of ordinary rock in the woods, but these 2 marks, and these are known in Irish as Cedimocht Columcille, and they're supposed to be the marks of Columcille's first steps as a baby, the first walking steps he took as a baby. So the area is, as I say, filled with stories and monuments all about about Columcille when he was a baby and a young child, long before he becomes the great cleric and saint, so on and so forth. And there is the little village of Kilmacrennan. And then there's a place here, Charman, where there's a holy well for Ethna. And then it appears that in medieval times there was a pilgrimage route. Here are the 3 lakes in Garton. There's Churchtown where he was born. Here's the little island. There's the Cedimocht. So it looks as if there was a circular pilgrimage route which began and ended at Kilmacrennan in honor as I say, of the birth and of the childhood. And a site I don't have on it because it's a secret site and people aren't supposed to know where it is. And indeed, I don't know where it is. But somewhere around, I've lost my, here we are, somewhere around there, there's a site where clay, white clay is gathered, and it's believed to have miraculous qualities. And that's where Ethna, his mother, is supposed to have felt the first pangs of her labor pains for the birth of the baby. So as you see, that whole landscape is imbued with stories and monuments and sites about the birth. Now, in one of the manuscripts of Adamnan, but the one we looked at earlier, which is in Switzerland, actually dates to about 710, 720, something like that. But there are a number of later manuscripts, 12th century manuscripts, which come from Durham Cathedral. I mentioned the importance of Durham Cathedral. And three manuscripts of the life survive from that. And up here, uniquely, they survive nowhere else, is Colmcille's genealogy, just up there where I have the red arrow. And it talks about his father, Fidelma, and then his Fidelmid or Phalemy, and then his mother, and then it goes on down through his brothers and sisters. And when you turn that into a table, this is what it looks like. So there we have his father, Fidelmid, his mother, Etna, Columba himself, his brother Ogun, and then three sisters, and then various people who descend from that. So this is the territory of his people, and they were expansive people. As I say, several of them become kings of Tara. In the first map I showed you, you might remember they were confined to about there, but that map was about 550. This is about 600, and they're expanding. But there still is the little kingdom of his mother's people, or almost certainly his mother's people. Now, to come to Durrow, I'm by no means an expert in Durrow, and I'm sure most people listening to me will have an awful lot more to say about Durrow than I have. But of course, and this, as you'll all know, the cross is now inside in the church. But the one thing about Durrow is that there are, if you remember back, I said there were something like 37 sites in Ireland associated with Columba, but Durrow is the only one that we know that was actually founded by Columba. All the others that are well known, Derry, Kells, Drumcliff, so on and so forth, we have no evidence that Columcille, no historical evidence that Columcille founded them, but we do have absolutely certain evidence that he founded Durrow. So Durrow is really, really important in the whole story. And the Venerable Bede, the great Northumbrian and English saint and writer, says that Columba founded Durrow before he left for Iona, but Adamnan says that it was while he was abbot of Iona that he comes back to Ireland and founds Durrow. And then there's confusion, excuse me, about who as were granted the site. And the annals of Ulster, there's the record of the, I'm sure people know this already, but the annals of the record of the death of a king called Eid Brenon, king of Teffa. Now Teffa is really modern Longford in a way, so it doesn't include the territory of Duro. So why he would, but the note says that he granted the land to Columcille, but why he would have granted it is not very clear. I think another strong candidate has to be this man down here, Eid Machanivre, who was was a cousin of Columba, and he was king of Tara. And I think it's possibly more likely that it's this man that granted Durrow, but I don't think we can be absolutely certain about any of this. Now, in Adamnan has quite a number of references to Durrow, at least 6, I think. And this is where Lajrain, the abbot of Durrow, is overworking the monks. And of course, Colmcille knows this miraculously when he's on Iona. Lajrain is overworking the monks who are constructing a building called the Maioris Domus. There's the words Maioris Domus. And then down, interestingly, here is rubber 80, and then the top of the next page, Campi. That is Durrow, but Durrow in Latin. And if you remember, earlier we saw the name Darva in Irish. So Adamnan gives us the forms of the name of Durrow in both its Irish form and in its Latin form. And here we have another use of the term campi ruberati. It's back to front in Latin. But it's just a story about, there's a battle in the County Derry, what's now County Derry, and Finan, a man who saw what had happened, tells Adamnan about the battle. And interestingly, he adds that Finan, there's Finan's name there, he was an anchorite, and there's the word anchoriticam. And sorry, I jumped ahead again. So here we have another reference to Durrow by Adamnan. And here's another one. I'm sure most of you will know the story about the sour apple tree at Durrow. And here again, Duro is given the name in a Latin form, Ruberus Campi, the plain of the oaks. And this is the story that there was the apple tree, and the word poma, pomora, there you are, pomosa, apple trees. That the apple trees were sour, and Colmcille then, of course, miraculously blesses them and they become sweet. And then, excuse me, this is another story from Durrow. It's in what we call the rubrics of the red bit at the top. And it's a story, I'll just read you concerning an angel of the Lord who came very quickly and opportunely to the rescue of a brother as he fell from the top of the round monastic house in the plain of the oak wood, or Durrow. And there again, Durrow Robertus Campo, there, the name of Durrow. So Durrow figures 6 times in Adamnan. Derry figures 3 times, and there aren't too many other places in Ireland that are mentioned at all. So that's just a kind of an indication. Now, all over Ireland, however, there are places connected with the story of St. Columcille. And one of the most, I suppose, biggest or most important of these is in Columcille in the south of Donegal, about 50, 60 kilometers from where I am now. And all around the edges of the valley, there is a pilgrimage route all along below the mountains, the circular pilgrimage route, which particularly today, lots of pilgrims and older pilgrims would have done this in their bare feet. I believe there's not too many people that do it in their bare feet anymore. But today is the day for doing the pilgrimage, although it's also, as we're allowed to be done between now and the 15th of August. So however, the flagstone, or the carved stone that you're looking at, dates from probably the 8th century. But the pilgrimage is interesting because it's a mixture of all sorts of things. Flags or stones like this, an old church, even a Neolithic court tomb. All of these ancient things in the valley have been incorporated in the pilgrimage route. And this is Tory Island off the west coast of Donegal. And Tory Island, again, is there's lots of stories and monuments on Tory connected with Columcille. It's very unlikely that Columcille himself ever went out to Tory. At least we don't have any evidence of it. And the stories date to much later than Columcille himself. But nevertheless, there's a great devotion. And if I said that on Tory, I'm sure I'd be pushed off the cliffs. This is one of the main monuments on the island, the so-called Tow Cross. Sorry, that's written in Irish there, Tow Cross, which is just at the quay, just above the quay the normal quay where you land now on the island. And on the mainland, this is the pier here at a place called Maharorty. This is the pier where you get the boat for Tory, which is out there about 9 miles out. And just behind it is a hill that the photograph was taken from, the Hill of the Saints. And there's an elaborate story about Columcille and 3 other saints having a competition as to which of them will convert Tory to Christianity. And of course, Colmcille inevitably wins the competition. And then on the mainland, not very far away from that, here is Holywell, Tubber Columcille, in a place called Ardybeg. Now, there are lots and lots. I don't know if I can go as far as to say there are hundreds of Tory wells, of holy wells in Ireland dedicated, but there's over 20 in Donegal itself. So I suspect there will be getting up towards the 100 mark all over the country. And then there's things like this cross. This is a cross at a place called Ray or Rye. It's pronounced Rye here, near the village of Falcara. And there's an elaborate story about Colmcille made this cross, and he was going to bring it over to Tory Island. But the saint of this particular church of Ray did Colmcille a favor. And so as a gift, he granted him the cross. Now, we know the cross is several hundred years later than Colmcille. It probably was made about 800 or thereabouts. But it's actually the largest cross of all the stone circled crosses in Ireland or Britain. This is the largest of them. But as you can see, it has very little decoration, almost no decoration, in the way that, for instance, the cross, the High Cross at Durrow has. Well, Derry is extremely important in the story of Colmcille, and is believed to have been it's claimed in legend that it was his first church, the first church he founded, and therefore the one that was most loved by him. Now, I've just put here, this is the earliest map we have of Derry. For those of you who know Derry, or know of it anyway, this channel here is what's now the bog side. It's the bog side because it was a marshy bog. It was originally a channel of the River Foyle. And Derry itself was an island in the Foyle at the time of Columcille. And here, but on the map, we can see remnants of the ancient monument. So this is a kind of, I'd say 1600, but we can see the round tower there. There are a number of other churches there. There's a couple of churches here. There's a church down here, and so on and so forth. So by analysing that map, we can work out some things about ancient Derry. And here, for instance, is a church, St. Augustine's Church, Church of Ireland, St. Augustine Church, which is on the city walls, the famous city walls of Derry. And almost certainly it was on this site that the original Columban monastery was founded, and then it became, like other ancient monasteries, became an Augustinian house in the early in the early 1200s or thereabouts. And the church was then just built and rebuilt and so on and so forth, and that's what it looks like now. And then in the center of this picture here is another famous church in Derry called the Long Tower, which takes its name from the Round Tower. And this is what you're looking at there is an 18th century, late 18th century church, but it's almost certainly built on the site of one of the great churches of medieval Derry, the Champel Moor, and the Round Tower was quite close to that. And here's another holy well in Bogside in Derry. And then places like Raphoe, here also in Donegal. The Donegal, the County Donegal is, as it were, split into two dioceses. The Diocese of Derry, which is in the north in Inishowen, and then the Diocese of Raphoe. And they really represent the territories of medieval lords. So the Diocese of Derry was the territory of the McLaughlin family around 1150, 1200, thereabouts. And the Diocese of Raphoe is the territory of the O'Donnells around the same time. And there are some, in the cathedral there are some remnants from the early medieval period, such as this is a depiction probably of the arrest of Christ, but we're not absolutely certain of that. But that's the interpretation that has been, and it probably dates to about the 12th century and would have been the lintel over the main door into the original cathedral. But then there are weird things all around Ireland. For instance, this rock on the shores of Connemara is known as Bald Columcille, or Columcille's boat. And the tradition is that out there are the Aran Islands, and he used this boat to go out to the Aran Isles. And in fact, there are several Bald Columcille in various places in Ireland. There's another one very similar to that. In other words, a big rock that just looks a bit like a boat. And there's one in Glen Columcille as well. And then we have things like this Choch Columcille in Kells, Columcille's house, but of course it doesn't date from the time of Columcille. It's almost certainly an 11th, 12th century building. And of course, near also in Kells, we have the round yard, and there are several high crosses. I just put this one on because it's the unfinished cross, and by studying this, we can see how they made high crosses. Now, swords beside Dublin Airport is also really what, I mean, its original name and its name in Irish is Sword Columcille. Sword means clean and pure. And it seems to refer originally to a well, to a holy well here. And but it's an interesting site because swords and a number of other so-called Columban sites in and around Dublin, the hinterland of Dublin and Leinster, are dedicated to St. Columcille, but strangely enough, they were almost certainly foundations of the Vikings, founded by Viking lords. And we know that the Vikings settled, in the Western Isles, north of Iona, and they were probably converted. In fact, they were converted to Christianity by Columban monks from Iona and from other churches in Scotland dedicated to Columba. So they then, in the 10th and 11th century, they, as it were, re-import Columban Christianity particularly into Dublin, and then spreading out from Dublin itself. And St. Audien's Church, which is the oldest church surviving in Dublin, in High Street in Dublin, seems to have been known as St. Colum's or St. Columcille's Church before it was dedicated to the Norman Saint Audien. So, and of course, Moon in County Kildare, Wayne Columcille. And I just put the base of the cross at Moon. I'm sure somebody will know Moon and know that there are many features there, but without any doubt, the cross to me is the Cross of Moon must be one of the most magnificent works of art from early Ireland, in my opinion, anyway. But it's another one of the churches which was possibly refounded and may have been dedicated to a different saint earlier on, and then it's rededicated by the Vikings to Columcille. I should have said that swords, for instance, was almost certainly dedicated to St. Brigid, but then, as I say, when it's rededicated by the Vikings, Christian Vikings, to St. Columcille. Now, we have many of the biggest, the best, the first, etc., all come from the Columban monasteries. And in terms of the manuscripts, that's certainly true. This is the Cathach, and possibly you've seen there have been a lot of information on line over the last few days about the Cathach. There's an exhibition about it in the Royal Irish Academy, which can be seen online. The Cathach is a manuscript of the Psalms. Only about half the original survives, and it's decorated very sort of minimally decorated, but it's decorated with these wonderful initial letters. And this is an M, and interestingly, it's the first letter of the word misericordia, mercy. And some people sort of suggest that these are sort of sad eyes looking for mercy. It's the suggestion that the original artist. Now, the artwork on this is very interesting because it's very early. It comes from what we call the Latin, the late Iron Age, and it's a much different manuscript to the highly decorated later manuscripts. But the Cathach, and of course the Cathach is said, it's suggested, was actually made by Columcille himself, and that what you're looking at there are the actual writing of Columcille. Now, we can't prove that, but to some extent we can't disprove it either. And although I gathered the tendency lately has been for the scholars who examine it to think that it's a little bit later. We used to put the date roughly 600 on it, but I believe now some people are arguing for a slightly later date. But whatever, it's very early in the whole sequence because the artwork shows us this. It's the artwork which proves that this is very early, this Latin style. And then, of course, you have your own major manuscript from County Offaly, the Book of Duro. And the Book of Duro is a marvelous manuscript. When we talk about these books, the Book of Kells, the Book of Durrow, the Book of Armagh, so on and so forth, you possibly know that they are primarily books of the Gospels. They're essentially gospel books. Now, they may have other things added in, but essentially they're books of the Gospels. So there, for instance, this is the page, the illustration introduces the Gospel of St. Mark. This is the Lion of St. Mark, which you see in St. Mark's Square in Venice. And this is a very early version of the same motif. The Cathach, I should have put that slide before, but the Cathach, of course, as well as being a manuscript, is also the name of a shrine box, this shrine box here, which was made to hold and to conserve, and indeed for the veneration of the Cathach. And it has a chain, you can see part of it there, which the person would put over their head, and I can't do this properly, but they would have held the Cathach on their chest like this and paraded, in later medieval times, paraded around the armies of the O'Donnells, of Donegal. And in that sense, the Cathach was a kind of a spiritual weapon, a talisman. And the Cathach was made originally, we know it was made in Kells by a man with a very Viking sounding name. He's Sitric Mac. And that was in the very late 11th and early 12th century, and about 1090. And but it was added to subsequently in later medieval times. And for instance, just there, I think it's very hard to see, but just there's an image of Saint Francis preaching to the birds. But it's felt that it's always understood that this is an image of Colmcille himself, or meant to be an image of Colmcille himself. Now, these manuscripts that we talked about are not just confined to Ireland. It's not just Irish manuscripts that are, Irish Columban manuscripts are important. This is the Lindisfarne Gospels, the Book of Lindisfarne, which dates to about the year 690 or thereabouts. And you're looking at a wonderful carpet page there. It looks like something from an Arabian sultan's palace or something, but it's actually a cross on the Book of Lindisfarne of about 690. And you might remember that earlier I emphasized the importance of Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne was a hugely important monastery. It was close to the castle or the palace of the kings of Northumbria, and there was a very great Irish influence through the island, through the monastery on Lindisfarne Island into Northumbria. It kind of falls apart, as some of you may know, when there's a big row about the dating of Easter. How do you date Easter? Well, to us, that's no longer really a major problem. But in early medieval times, it was a huge controversial problem. And there were at least two versions of the kind of computistics, the mathematics for doing this. And the Columban monks held out with a kind of an old-fashioned form of dating Easter, and they were, if you like, defeated. And so then the Irish monks left Lindisfarne and came over to Ireland. But Adamnan, the famous Adamnan we've mentioned a couple of times, Adamnan tried to revive that Irish influence in Lindisfarne and in Northumbria particularly. And he was great friends with the king of Northumbria at the time, a man called Alfred. But Alfred had also an Irish name. He's known in Irish as Flanfina. And he was almost certainly born here in Donegal in Inishowen, and his mother was from Inishowen. But that's another story for another day. But sticking with manuscripts, of course, the most famous manuscript of all is the Book of Kells. And, the Book of Kells is one of the great art objects of Western Europe, alongside the Mona Lisa and all of these things. And it seems to be made sometime in the very early 9th century, about 810, 820. Now, there's a huge controversy, well, there's millions of controversies about the Book of Kells and how you interpret it. But one of the big controversies is, where was it made? And was always understood until recently by a lot of people that was made in Iona and then brought to Kells. But most recently, Dr. Dan McCarthy, the man I mentioned at the beginning, who gave us these new dates for Columba, he argues that in fact it was made in Kells, and he uses all sorts of very interesting analysis to support that argument. Now, and he was the man that suggested that Columcille died in the year 593 rather than 597, as is better known. And in Adamnan has a very elaborate story about the death of Columcille, which the story begins with Columcille blessing the island, and as he's walking back to the monastery, then this white horse comes to sympathize with him, because the white horse knows that Columcille is about to die, and it's a great romantic story. I wouldn't want to adjudicate on whether it's true or not, but it's a beautiful story, and it has influenced a number of artists, inspired a number of artists down the years. Now, one of the things in the Book of Kells is this picture of the mother and child. And the mother and child is one of the great motifs of Renaissance arts all over the place, as in the Renaissance and since. But it wasn't very well known as a motif in early medieval times. But the Columban monasteries seem to have it's almost a brand for because it appears on a number of their works of art. And this is to bring us back to County Offaly, because there is a huge emphasis in the Columban literature and art on mothers and women in general, but particularly women as mothers. And this is brought to its greatest degree in the so-called Con Adamnan, or Lex Innocentium, that was enacted, written by Adamnan, compiled or composed by Adamnan, and enacted at the Synod of Birr in the year 697, when it got the support of virtually every single cleric and bishop and abbot in Ireland and Scotland, and also the kings. We have a list of the people that supported the law of Adamnan, and there is certainly no obvious people missing. But this is an extremely important thing. The Con Adamnan, the Lex, it's known by both Irish Con Adamnan, or in Latin Lex Innocentium. It's the earliest law anywhere on the planet, as far as we know, for the protection of non-combatants in times of war. And it's been characterized as a very early version, but 1,000 years earlier than the Geneva Convention, for instance. Now, as I said, the mother and child motif appears on a number of Columban works of art. This is St. Martin's Cross in Iona, and here it is on St. Oran's Cross in Iona. These are crosses of the late 8th century. And here, there's only one depiction of it in Ireland, and it's at the Columban Monastery at Drumcliff in County Sligo, where Yeats is buried. And there's the remains of the Round Tower. And here there's an early high cross. This is it. I would date that myself to about 1010, 1020, that kind of date. But on the edge of the transom, just here on the south transom, is again the depiction of the mother and child. So the mother and child, women, the protection of women, but most especially women as mothers, is a hugely important thing in the whole of the Columban iconography, literature, and even the legislation. And it's sort of summed up in this hymn, which is written on Iona by a man called Cochedna, and it's a hymn in honor of the Virgin Mary, again emphasizing women and mothers in the church. Now, I'm just going to finish up. I just thought I'd finish off with this little quotation, which is kind of a tribute to Columcille. And if I was actually with you in the room giving this lecture, one of my jokes, as it were, was to read this and then ask, Could anybody tell us who would have said that? Anyway, it is an honor to address you on such an auspicious day, the 9th of June. This is the feast day of St. Columba, who very specially symbolizes the historic linkages and deep bonds between Britain and Ireland. Born a prince in Donegal, exiled in Iona, and honoured today in the central lobby of the Palace of Westminster. Do you remember I showed you a picture earlier on from Westminster? His monks provided not just an Irish national treasure, the Book of Kells, but also a British national treasure, the Lindisfarne Gospels. So I won't ask you to put up your hands, but I think most people would be very surprised to know that the man who actually said that was David Cameron, the British Prime Minister. He was speaking at Stormont on the 9th of June in 2011, and he made this tribute to St. Colmcille on this very day 10 years ago. Poor old David Cameron has fallen from grace now, is not very popular, but I think we can at least strongly approve of his approval for St. Columkill. And of course, one of the reasons he used that is because the name Columba means the dove, and of course it's the international peace symbol. And the story of Columkill has been raised several times in the last few years in the course of the Northern Ireland peace process. So with that happy thought, I'll finish up. Thank you very much indeed for listening to me.
Thanks a million, Brian. That was absolutely fantastic. I think the range and the scope and the extent of your slides show the depth of your research and the knowledge you have about St. Columkill. And I think we're so privileged today on the 9th of June to have you as our speaker for the feast day of St. Columkill. So we're going to enter into a bit of a Q&A now, and I can see there's a bit of activity on the chat box. So
should I stop sharing at this stage?
Yeah, you can stop sharing, yeah, if you wish.
Okay.
I thought actually that that last piece was, I mean, so I suppose poignant at the moment when you think of how things have changed in 10 years.
Yeah.
And given even today's breakdown of talks, you know, you just think, gosh, hopefully the spirit of St. Columkill will infuse talks in the future, you know, and the peace process won't be affected. So I'll just start moderating some of the questions that are coming in. So the first one I think was from James Scully, and he wanted to know about your tours. So do you lead pilgrims and visitors on the Trust Columcille, or are there other guides available?
No, well, now and again, but not very often, not in an organized way. But in fact, we haven't. It's something we should really look at, doing a kind of a leaflet or a map. This wasn't known about. I'm going to blow my own trumpet now. This was not known about, but I had made a version of Mamas O'Donnell's text, and the stories are scattered in it, and he doesn't actually say there was a pilgrimage. But when you plot the stories on a map, they're in a circle. They literally form a circle. And as I say, they start with his mother, Etna, and then take you to the place where she had the first labor pains, then where he's born, then where he's baptized, where he played as a baby, where he walked for the first time, and so on and so forth. So people might think it's a rude thing to say, but it's really a theme park. That area of Garton is really a theme park with, you know, all these monuments, each of which narrate a little bit more of the story of the baby and the child Columcille and his mother. Back to that topic, which is hugely important. Women and mothers are hugely important in the whole of the Columban story.
Yeah, is that quite just a question for myself actually? Is that a literal mother and baby thing, or is it more of is it like a metaphor for humanity? Is it quite literally mothers and babies?
I think it's more the latter, that it is literal. It's, you know, women. I mean, Adam was very clear that he's thinking to protect women and children, and in fact clerics as well, from warfare and from, you know, that they're the innocent. In fact, I didn't know what the meaning of innocent was until somebody pointed out to me the other day. It's based, in the English word innocent is based on the Latin word noccio in the middle, which means to injure. So an innocent is one who does not injure, but who is injured, as it were.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. I have a question here from Sarah, who says, why do you think Columba's cult was more popular than Patrick's when you look at place names, etc.? Were Armagh not doing a good enough job?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are. I really don't. Well, the first thing that one has to say about of the three people, now I'm going to be slightly controversial, of the three saints, Patrick wasn't Irish at all. He was British. St. Brigid may or may not have existed as a real person, but Columba was very much a real person and a real Irish person. So, and the stories kind of develop about him. And I mean, some of the most best known stories, his copying of the book and all. I mean, it's fiction. They're late medieval fiction. We can demonstrate that. They're not original. But and here in Donegal, for instance, he's a kind of a Valentine. There are songs about him, nothing very spiritual. He just helps young lads to get off with their girlfriends, and it's that sort of thing. So he's a homely guy. He's a man you could have a pint with, kind of thing. I think is the essence of that.
A question from Michael Byrne, who wonders, what are the good translations today of Adamnon's life?
The best one, unfortunately, the man who wrote it is a man called Richard Sharp, and undoubtedly it is the best one. It's in Penguin Books, and poor old Richard died last year. He was a young man. As far as we know, he didn't die of the COVID, but he died during the earliest days of the lockdown. But Richard was immensely, now he was a professor in Oxford, but he was immensely knowledgeable about Columba, Adamnon, and Irish. And in fact, I brought Richard, now that I've forgotten that, I brought Richard to Durrow when we weren't supposed to go in, I think, but we did go in.
Adrienne has a couple of questions. I'm going to just meld them together. So she's just saying that it's very interesting, and I'm sure we all know here in Offaly noticed when you put up the slide of Crockenhill that there's a Crockenhill in Offaly as well. And she wonders, is there a connection? And secondly, she just mentions or says that you never mentioned the battle story. And is this because you doubt it, or because it's already too well known?
Yeah, well, it's not only that I doubt it, I know it's a fiction. Right. The earliest version we have of that story appears in the 16th century, not 1,000 years after the 6th. I've written a couple of articles which were published in Sligo. I'll never be allowed into Sligo again because I've kind of demolished that sort. But we know that's, I mean, to be honest with you, being serious now for a second, it's a scandal, it's a libelous story, slanderous story. I mean, portrays Colmcille as a war maker. There's no evidence whatsoever that he was. And the story itself dates from the 16th century. Excuse me. We think one of the reasons we think it appears, the copyright story being at the heart of it, is that it's a reflection of in the early 16th century of the most recent invention of the time. What was the most recent invention of the time? Well, it was the printed book. So when printing comes into existence, it causes all sorts of complications about copyright. In the same way as what we're using today, intellectual property problems have arisen with the internet and so on and so forth. And almost the same thing happened. We certainly know the same thing happened with the invention of printing books. And it's probably a story really about that. Now, there may be elements that are a little bit early, but the full story, there's not the slightest evidence that Colmcille had anything to do with a battle.
There's a comment here saying that Sligo Library will have to revise its wall paintings of Colmcille's life.
No, it's a great story, but it in the way if you were trying to understand, say, the Cold War between Russia and the West, you wouldn't go reading the novels of I'm trying to think of the guy, this great spy. I just forgotten his name. And the same way, if you want to find out history earlier, you won't go reading late 16th. I mean, it's a piece of fiction. It's a wonderful piece of fiction, but it's a fiction.
Story. Yeah.
Yeah. And that says the big picture in the Sligo Library should stay, because it's a literary picture.
Yes, yeah. And just to go back
James
to
Bond is the guy I was trying to think of.
James Bond, of course.
Sorry.
Just to go back to Adrian's first question, which was about Croghan Hill, is there any connection between the two place names?
Well, Croghan, of course, has its own, with the bog bodies. Now, I don't know if this for certain, but there are Croghan Hills. I mean, the most famous Croghan is in Roscommon, Rathcroghan, and there are Croghans all over Ireland. And I was told by a scholar who I better not name in case he changed his mind, but he thought that it had something to do, the root of the word had something to do with an old Irish word, crud, or something like that, that refers to blood. So the mind boggles if that's the root of the word. What where their sacrifices or God knows what. Yeah. But I don't think there's any connection between the Offaly Croghan Hill and Colmcille, but it has its own very particular archaeology.
Yeah, I'm struck today. Obviously, it's the 9th of June, and here in Offaly, we're associated with the Passion Day, but this year, it's all connected to this national celebration of Columcille 1500. And I just wonder, how busy have you been personally with the national celebrations? We're very lucky to have you here on our Patron Day, but I'm sure you've been so busy nationally. You might let us know how busy you've been.
Well, through the miracle of the internet, I'm also giving a lecture in Sligo at the very same time as I'm talking to you. I'm also involved in the release of 3 videos tonight. I gave an interview to Radio Nageltalk this morning and another one to the BBC this afternoon. And I gave up counting when I got the 40th request to do something. So actually, can I just say one thing, and this is maybe controversial. I'm a bit annoyed with the government. Some of us started campaigning with the government about 5 years ago that this should be a national celebration, national commemoration. But I'm afraid the government gave up and hasn't bothered. And but there has been, having said that, maybe even better still, there's been a remarkable uprising of interest at local level and local things, and that's fantastic. Even though it's causing me a lot of
very busy man
tired nights.
The other thing I was struck by was the amount of photographs you have of all the national sites related to Columba or Columcille, and have you personally been to all of those sites? Have you actually been to all the sites related to Columba?
Well, I don't know that I've been to all of them, but I've been to a lot of them. I mean, it is a kind of a hobby. Although I'm giving Columcille up. From tomorrow, I'm giving Columcille up. And I'm going instead, I have to wave my book.
Yes.
I'm taking up Adamnon instead.
I'd just like to tell everyone who's listening and watching that the book, Brian's latest book, Adamnon, Aunon, Unan, if I've got that right, the life and afterlife of a Donegal saint, is available from Offaly History at the price of €20 and €18 to members. So get in touch if you want a copy of it.
Thank you for the ad.
And now I think I might at this point ask Helen Bracken to unmute herself and make herself known, because Helen is the chair of Offaly History, but she has for the longest time been involved with the Duro High Cross Committee. So today is the highlight of the year, particularly this year of Columcille 1500. So Helen would like to say a few words. So I'm just going to see if Helen's ready there. Just one tick there now, Helen.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
That's okay, Helen.
Sorry, I forgot to. Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. Off you go.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for all you're doing tonight. I'm overwhelmed by this lecture, and I could not believe our luck when Kieran told us that that Brian was available to do it. And I thought there couldn't be a better person to do it on St. Colmcille's feast day, our patron day in Duro. And he is so steeped in the history and so many aspects of Colmcille, and it's as if it's in his veins. And I can really appreciate that so much. The amount of detail, and again, the illustrations, the work of a great archaeologist, great work done there, very sound work. And that's why I was so interested to find out why did some of the dates were changed. But anyway, there had to be a good reason for it. It was an absolutely marvelous lecture, and I know from the questions and the interaction with the viewers that this is really one of the highlights of the year. And it's on the day that we have. Normally, this is Pattern Day in Durrow, and a Pattern Day is next to Christmas, or equates with Christmas. People in Donegal, I'm sure, feel the same about their dates. We would normally have a full program on the Pattern Day, First Communion Mass added in the last century, the Pattern Mass, procession to the Columcille's well, the children's sports, and there were very big sports years ago, quite important competitions. Then either a pattern dance or the card games. So a full day, and it's a holiday, a local holiday. Children didn't go to school on the day. The Leaving Cert changed all that. You had to turn up for the Leaving Cert, made a difference. So a huge day. But I have to say that this year, we actually have had a wonderful Pattern Day. All the groups in Duro got together with us, Duro High Cross Committee and Durham Pattern Committee, and we came up with a virtual programme. So Mass was by webcam, and just saying in passing that we commissioned 2 beautiful banners for the Church of the Assumption Tullamore, and the Diocese of Raphoe gifted us the image of the icon. So the banners are there. Our programme very much involved the school, and the children were in school for the first day. So they had total immersion today in Columcille. So it's a unique experience. Out of adversity comes advantage. We've had clips from the past. We had a lead in yesterday evening. This is all via Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, which I knew little about a year ago. But and with Zoom has given us this possibility. So full program today. We had the Mass. We actually had permission to visit the well today. The procession couldn't go ahead, of course, because of COVID. But we visited the well, and people met up. We had a tree planting, and a very important hello to Donegal. In 1997, we had a huge celebrations for commemorating the 14th centenary of the death of Colmcille. And people from Garton and Donegal, May McClintock and some ladies from Antashka brought 3 trees to Durrow, and they were planted the previous Easter in 97. Those trees are beautiful, healthy oak trees. And today we planted a tree for the 15th centenary. And present at the planting were our 2 centenarians, Paddy Clavin of Durrow and Mrs. Maggie Sullivan. So definitely we're making history as well today, and we're linking with the past. We also have clips from past events, the slots all day today, tree planting. What else had we? We lit a special candle. And this lecture was one of the anchors of the day. We are really so happy with this lecture. I'm very glad it's being recorded, because I need to go back there several times and look at it, and it's absolutely marvelous. So I couldn't thank you enough, and our good luck. I think Colmcille is doing his bit for us at this time. And I am now going to say to people, get out there and buy that book. I'm looking forward to reading Adam Non, Aunan, Yunan, whatever we call him. Really, bringing the end of a wonderful day, bringing about the end of a wonderful day. And thank you so much. And thank you to all the people who have attended. And I know that you have enjoyed it immensely, as I really have. So thank you, as a person from Duro, that the people of Donegal, and your whole life, so much of your life's work was spent in Donegal. It just shows.
I'm actually from Donnybrook, of all places.
Yeah, well, your working life, and you know, you're breathing Donegal, and so Donnybrook won't forget you either.
And just as we're in the thanks mode, can I just thank you on behalf of everyone in Ireland for helping to preserve and save the Durrow Cross and all the work that went on for that. It's a marvelous project.
Yeah, we're battlers, and we keep going. Yes, we look forward to great times in Durrow, and we want the rest of the country to know that we are Durrow in County Offaly. Durrow and Laois is wonderful, but we are Durrow in Offaly. Durrow monastic size, pattern of Durrow. Thank you all.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Helen. And just thanks again to everyone who logged into this lecture, and to remind you that it will actually be up on YouTube in a couple of days. And a final thanks now to Dr. Brian Lacey for a wonderful evening. I think we've all learned something new. Everyone's got something new out of it. I certainly have. And it was just a pleasure to listen to your lecture and your wonderful slides, and especially on this day, the 9th of June. So thank you again, and I hope we have you back for another lecture maybe next year.
Good morning, Lisa. Good morning.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.